Hi, and welcome. I'm Terry, and this is English Bus. In this series, we'll be using the AST Reading Key Core 2. This is our first lesson using this book, so let me briefly describe it to you. In this book, you will find 3 separate chapters. Each chapter is broken into a number of units. Altogether, there are 21 units. This book, altogether, with all 21 units, will help you expand your vocabulary and deepen your knowledge on a wide variety of academic subjects, including social studies, science, and visual arts. Now, the first chapter is broken up into social studies and history. So, let's open up to the first unit in Chapter 1 and find out what's inside. Unit 1 is entitled History and Culture. Very exciting yet broad topic. So, before we begin, let me ask you one question. How do historians and archaeologists study the past? Well, it's pretty simple. Some of the archaeologists look at ancient buildings, very old buildings, to find clues about how people used to live. They also look at artifacts, things that the ancient people made in the past. Or they look at the other remains, the physical remains, like the bones or the hair. Historians, on the other hand, they tend not to look at the buildings. Instead, they use primary and secondary sources, things written down by people who lived at the time or people who lived after that reporting on the subject. So that was a brief introduction. Now that we've done here, let's check out some keywords we'll be using today. Let's check out the keywords we'll be using today. Here we have 3 pictures, but first let's focus on the picture on the right. It's of a woman digging somewheres. This woman is an archaeologist. An archaeologist is a person who studies past human cultures. She's digging for some artifacts. An artifact is an item created by people in the past, such as a pottery or a picture. We have to look for these artifacts because they've been buried or hidden somewheres and remain hidden. Now, she might also be looking for remains. Remains also tend to be the physical remains, the bones, like we see all the way on the left, the bones of a person, or the hair, or maybe the bones of their pet, or what they ate. Those are all the remains, the very physical remains of a person or living thing. Archaeologists also dig around ruins. Ruins are very ancient buildings, very old buildings, like this one here. The Sphinx is considered an ancient Egyptian ruin. It is a building or a structure built a long time ago that remains on the planet today. So an archaeologist uses the artifacts, remains, and ruins as clues to explain or help explain about past human culture. Clues or clue are hints from the past. We use these to then try to make educated guesses or reports on how these people lived. We do our best to explain past human cultures. These clues or hints are the best way for us to do so. Here we have very interesting pictures, but first let's look at this man on the right. This man on the right is teaching from a very old looking book. He is a historian. A historian studies past human culture as well. However, they usually base their work on primary or secondary written material. Things written down by people are what historians usually use. They can also use photographs as well. So a historian based their work on reports or other written material from the past. Based on means simply to use or to ground your work in. To have that work, the primary or secondary material, as the foundation, as the starting point for later work, later books or reports the historian might use. Now, a historian uses what an eyewitness finds and sees and then later writes down. An eyewitness is somebody who sees something happening. An eyewitness to a crime scene is somebody who stands there and watches the crime occur. Historians also come in contact with oral cultures. Oral means spoken, so spoken cultures or oral stories are spoken stories. Historians use these oral cultures, oral stories, to then also write their reports as well. And on to our last batch of words here, 2 words. We find a very interesting timeline. A timeline is simply a linear progression of time that we show with one line, and we usually mark historical events on it. So the present today usually comes on the right-hand side, and the past we find all the way on the other side of the line, the past. Now, we usually break up time on timelines in one way. We usually separate it based on the year 0. After the year 0, we find the Common Era, or Anno Domini. Two common ways of explaining our current time. Before the year 0, we find before the Common Era, or before Christ. 2 common ways of explaining time that occurred before the year 0. We find these 4 simple ways of explaining time. One way of dividing it. We also use abbreviations of these words as well. An abbreviation is taking maybe the first letter or another letter within a word and breaking the words down into just a few letters. So we explain Common Era by just writing CE. So 1900 CE, 1900 BCE would come all the way over here before the Common Era, BCE. 1900 BCE is all the way over here. 1900 CE is all the way over here. So that's briefly about timelines. Now that we've wrapped up the key words, let's read. Now let's read. Clues from the past. History is the study of people, places, and events from the past. We study history to learn about the past. Experts such as historians and archaeologists help us understand the past. To learn about life from long ago, they examine clues and records from people in the past. How do they do this? Historians use primary and secondary sources. A primary source is written material at the time an event happened. It is often written by a person who was an eyewitness to the event. Primary sources can be books, diaries, reports, official documents, and photographs. A secondary source is material written based on primary sources. Some historians also study oral history. This is a collection of stories that are told and passed down from one generation to the next. So quickly, just to summarize what main points about historians, is that they usually use primary sources. Primary sources are books, diaries, reports, official documents, and photographs. Secondary sources are materials written based on these sources. Historians sometimes use both of them when writing their own books. What happens when there is no record or written history left behind? That is where archaeologists are needed. They examine artifacts. These are man-made objects used by past civilizations. Historical artifacts include tools, pottery, clothes, jewelry, and even paintings. Archaeologists also study human remains, such as bones and hair. There are many ruins of ancient buildings for them to study as well. All of these contribute to archaeologists learning how people lived in the past. So quickly, just to summarize about archaeologists here, they mainly focus on artifacts and remains as well as buildings, ruins. Artifacts is anything that is left behind by ancient people, such as tools, pottery, clothing, etc., etc. Remains are the physical remains of a person, the bones, the hair, things such as that. Now moving back onto the passage, many historians often make timelines to list events in history. Timelines show the dates that various events occurred and let historians see the order of past events. On many timelines, there are sometimes the abbreviations BC and AD after dates. BC stands for before Christ, AD stands for Anno Domini. That is Latin for years after the birth of Christ. However, I'd like to point out that BCE and CE are now also commonly used on many timelines. This is because BC and AD are too religious in their orientation. Many people that aren't Christian or Catholic use BCE and CE, very commonly accepted. Nowadays, historians have access to many modern technologies. This makes studying the past much easier. Many primary sources have been translated and published in books or on CD-ROMs. Other books, such as encyclopedias, almanacs, and atlases, provide much information too. Studying the past has never been easier than today. Wow, great job! I had a lot of fun reading with this passage. I hope you did too. Go back and review, and when you're ready, let's move on to the checkup. Are you ready? All right then, let's have a look at the checkup. True or false? Question 1. A primary source is a material often written by an eyewitness. Is this true or false? This statement is true. A primary source is often written by an eyewitness. However, sometimes it is simply written by somebody living during those times, experiencing the same things. Question number 2. A secondary source is a collection of stories that are told and passed down from one generation to the next. Is this statement A, true, or B, false? This is B, false. A secondary source is usually a source that used primary sources when it was being created. So a history report that a historian writes is a secondary source. They use primary sources mainly to produce secondary sources of information. A history textbook is a good example of a secondary source. Moving on to question 3. Artifacts are things such as bones and hair. Is this true or false? This statement is false. Artifacts are usually or are commonly known to be the things, the objects, or the art created by historical people, by ancient people. So pottery is a good example of an artifact. We usually consider bones and hair to be remains or human remains, not artifacts. However, the meaning is very similar. Moving on to question 4. When there is no record or written history, who needs to do what? Here, you need to look for two things. The person or the type of person, and what they do. All right? So is the answer A, historians need to use primary and secondary sources? B, historians need to examine artifacts, remains, and ruins? C, archaeologists need to use primary and secondary sources? Or is it D, archaeologists need to examine artifacts, remains, and ruins? The answer here is D, archaeologists need to examine artifacts, remains, and ruins. When there is no record or written history, historians need to rely on archaeologists to examine the artifacts, the remains, the ruins, the actual physical remains of the ancient past, because there is no more written history that historians rely on. Question number 5. What do timelines show? Do they show A, various places in the world, B, dates of capitals in various time zones, C, dates of various events, or D, various planets in our solar system? Timelines show C, dates of various events. This question was rather simple, but timelines are a usually linear path that we use to show when dates occur and in what order they occurred in the past. Question number 6. Historians write books blank primary and secondary sources. What answer best fits in the blank? Is it A, clues, B, eyewitness, C, based on, or D, abbreviations? Historians write books C, based on. Historians use primary and secondary sources when writing their books or articles, so we can say that historians write books that are based on these sources. On to question 7 now. Some blank that archaeologists use are artifacts and remains. What answer best fits in the blank here? Is it A, eyewitness, B, clues, C, timelines, or D, abbreviations? Some B, clues. Clues are what archaeologists use to examine or understand the past. Some examples of these clues are artifacts and remains. On to our last question now. And blank is the shortening of two words or a phrase into just a few letters. What word best goes in the blank? Is it A, clues, B, eyewitness, C, oral, or D, abbreviation? The answer that best fits in the blank here is D. An abbreviation is the shortening of words or a phrase into just a few letters. For example, BCE, as we talked about earlier, means before the Common Era. CE means Common Era, which we are currently living in. Wow, great job on the checkup. I hope you had fun learning about history and culture. I know I did. Study hard, and I'll see you again. Bye-bye.